Welcome to Nazir Fears, where fear finds you. Do you dare to enter a world of unspeakable horror and chilling mysteries? If you love creepy true stories, urban legends, haunted places, and terrifying experiences, you're in the right place. What we offer: spine-chilling horror stories, dark and mysterious urban legends, real-life encounters with the supernatural, psychological horror and unexplained mysteries, new nightmares. Every daily upload a new video only for you. Subscribe if you dare. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You never know what's lurking in the dark. The night of the wailing storm. It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend getaway, a break from the constant buzz of the city. Sarah, Lisa, and Mark had all been friends since childhood, and they needed a break, time to relax, reconnect, and leave behind the weight of their daily lives. The cabin they rented was nestled deep in the woods, miles away from the nearest town. And that was exactly what they wanted. The promise of silence, fresh air, and the sound of nothing but the wind rustling through the trees sounded like paradise. When they arrived at the cabin, the sun was just beginning to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across the wooden deck. Sarah stepped out of the car and inhaled deeply, the scent of pine trees and damp earth filling her lungs. She smiled at Lisa and Mark, who were already unloading bags and preparing to settle in. It was their first time staying in a cabin like this, and they were all eager for the weekend to unfold. The cabin itself was quaint, old even, with creaky floors and heavy wooden beams. It had character, but there was an eerie atmosphere about it too. The surrounding woods were thick, and there was a slight feeling of isolation in the air. But Sarah shrugged it off. There was no need to overthink it. They were here to have fun, not dwell on strange feelings. As evening fell, the sky turned a brilliant shade of pink, and the three friends gathered around the fireplace. They popped open a bottle of wine, laughing and reminiscing about old times. The crackling of the fire was soothing, and the storm clouds in the distance seemed like nothing more than a passing inconvenience. But as the hours wore on, the wind began to pick up, rustling the trees outside and sending an occasional shiver through the cabin's wooden frame. Mark, who was sitting closest to the window, looked out at the darkening sky. "Looks like a storm's coming," he said, more to himself than anyone else. Lisa, who was curled up on the couch, glanced over. "It's just a storm. We've got a fire going and plenty of wine. It'll be cozy." But Sarah couldn't shake the unease creeping into her chest. The storm wasn't just approaching, it was closing in fast. The first rumble of thunder echoed through the trees, faint but present. Sarah felt a cold gust of wind whip through the small cracks in the cabin, and a shiver ran down her spine. As the storm drew nearer, the winds grew stronger. Mark stood up and closed the windows, making sure everything was sealed. "Should be okay now," he said, though the storm outside was beginning to sound more like an oncoming freight train than a simple thunderstorm. The lights flickered once, then twice, before finally going out completely, plunging the cabin into darkness. "Great," Sarah muttered, her voice strained as she fumbled for her phone. "Guess we're in for a long night." Lisa let out a nervous laugh. "This is it then, a night of cards, candles, and our very own horror movie," she joked, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. The wind howled outside, and the thunder cracked so loudly it shook the walls. For a moment, there was a strange stillness. Everything seemed to stop, like the storm itself was holding its breath. And then, from somewhere deep in the forest, there came a wailing sound. Soft at first, but it rose in pitch, long and mournful. It echoed through the trees, filling the cabin with a sense of dread that no one could explain. Sarah froze. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice barely above a murmur. Lisa looked at her wide-eyed. What was that?" "I don't know," Mark said, his tone unnervingly calm. "Maybe an animal or something in the wind." But Sarah wasn't so sure. The sound wasn't like any animal she had ever heard. It wasn't a howl or a growl. It was something else, something deep and sad, almost human. The wind picked up again, whipping through the trees and rattling the windows. The wailing grew louder, as if it was moving closer, and Sarah felt her heart begin to race. "Okay, this isn't funny anymore," Sarah said, standing up from her chair and moving toward the window. She peeked through the glass, but all she could see was the heavy rain and the shadows of the trees bending in the wind. "There's nothing out there," she muttered to herself, though she wasn't sure if she was trying to reassure herself or the others. Lisa stood up and joined her by the window. "That noise, it's coming from the woods. It sounds like someone's in pain." Mark, who had been pacing near the fireplace, stopped and turned to them. "It's just the wind. It's making the trees creak and groan. Maybe it's an old tree falling or something." But Sarah wasn't convinced. The wailing wasn't like any sound she had ever heard before. It was otherworldly, and it was growing louder, closer. She could feel it in her bones, a chill that crept up her spine and made her skin crawl. There was something wrong with the storm, something unnatural. Suddenly, the door to the cabin slammed open and the wind howled in. Mark rushed over to shut it, but as he did, he noticed something strange. The air outside, though cold, was thick with mist, heavy fog that seemed to rise up from the forest floor and move toward the cabin. It was as if the fog had a mind of its own, twisting and curling around the trees like something alive. Mark slammed the door shut, locking it quickly. "We need to stay inside," he said, his voice tense. "There's something off about this storm." Just as Mark finished speaking, the lights flickered back on. But they didn't stay on. The power surged and flickered again before shutting off completely. The room was plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow of the fireplace and the flickering light from their phones. And then, from the attic, came a sound that made Sarah's blood run cold. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. It was the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, dragging across the floorboards above them. The sound was heavy, like something, or someone, was moving in the attic. "Who's up there?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. "We're the only ones here," Sarah whispered, her heart pounding in her chest. "Aren't we?" Mark grabbed a flashlight from his bag and, without a word, headed toward the attic stairs. Sarah and Lisa followed, their steps echoing in the silence of the cabin. The wailing continued outside, but it was distant now, replaced by an unsettling stillness that filled the cabin. Every creak of the floorboards seemed amplified, every breath too loud. As they reached the top of the stairs, Sarah's heart was in her throat. Mark turned the flashlight on, its beam cutting through the darkness. The attic door was wide open, though none of them had gone up there. Inside, the room was filled with dust and old furniture, the air thick with the smell of mildew. But as Sarah stepped closer to the doorway, she saw it. A rocking chair in the far corner of the room, rocking gently back and forth, as if someone had just left it. The hair on the back of Sarah's neck stood on end. She stepped back, But before she could say anything, the attic window exploded outward, the glass shattering in all directions. A gust of wind rushed in, slamming the door shut behind them. They were trapped. The wailing returned, louder than ever, and the wind outside howled like something alive. The rocking chair began to rock faster, as if it were being pushed by invisible hands. Then, in the flashing light of the storm, Sarah saw it, a dark shape in the corner of the attic, moving, stretching upward. It was tall, almost too tall, its features indistinct in the shadows. A flash of lightning illuminated the figure, and in that split second, Sarah saw its face, a twisted, pale visage, its eyes glowing in the dark. The figure lunged at them, its hands outstretched, and in that moment, Sarah screamed. The next thing Sarah knew, they were running back downstairs and out of the cabin. The storm had subsided, and the sky was eerily calm. The wailing stopped, but the presence of something unseen lingered in the air. The fog had lifted, and the moonlight reflected off the wet ground, casting long shadows in every direction. The three of them left the cabin without looking back, each of them haunted by the memory of the night the storm brought something dark into their lives. And though they tried to forget, the wailing never truly left them, echoing in their minds whenever the storm rolled in. The Ghost of Blackwater Creek. Jake had always been fascinated by lighthouses, so when his old friend Ben invited him to spend the weekend at a secluded lighthouse on Blackwater Island, he couldn't resist. The island was known for its haunting beauty and its historical lighthouse, which had been standing for over a century. Ben, a historian who specialized in maritime history, had spent the last few months researching the lighthouse and its mysterious past. He was eager to show Jake the results of his work. Despite the island's eerie reputation, Jake found himself excited to escape the noise of the city and explore the lighthouse's hidden history. When they arrived on the island, the air was thick with salt and the smell of the sea. The lighthouse towered in the distance, its white stone stark against the darkening sky. The island was more remote than Jake had imagined. No other buildings, just the lighthouse and the tall, dense trees surrounding it. As they made their way across the island toward the lighthouse, Jake couldn't help but feel a strange unease creep up his spine. He tried to shake it off, attributing it to the isolation and the ghost stories he had heard growing up. Ben was practically glowing with excitement as they approached the lighthouse. "You have no idea how much research I've done on this place," Ben said. "There are some fascinating stories. They say the lighthouse is cursed. Some of the old sailors claimed they saw ghosts, and several ships have gone missing near these waters." Jake raised an eyebrow, trying to keep the conversation light. "Cursed, huh? Well, I'm sure we'll find some great stories to tell after the weekend." The lighthouse was as imposing on the inside as it was on the outside. They entered through a heavy wooden door that creaked and groaned, clearly not having been opened in years. Dust filled the air, and the walls were lined with old maritime equipment, ropes, charts, and faded photographs of sailors long gone. The room smelled musty, but there was something comforting about it, something nostalgic. As they climbed the winding staircase that spiraled up to the top of the lighthouse, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching them. He glanced over at Ben, who was lost in thought, his mind clearly racing with the historical significance of the place. But Jake felt a sudden chill. He turned around, half expecting to see someone standing behind him, but there was nothing. Only the cold stone walls and the sound of their footsteps echoing up the narrow staircase. When they reached the top of the lighthouse, The view was breathtaking. The ocean stretched out for miles, dark and mysterious, with the occasional flash of lightning illuminating the horizon. The wind howled around them as the storm clouds gathered overhead, and the lighthouse light flickered to life, casting a pale glow across the water. Jake felt the weight of the atmosphere settle over him, and for the first time, he felt uneasy. "This is incredible," Jake said, trying to hide the growing discomfort he felt. But as he spoke, a low groan echoed through the room. It wasn't the wind. It was a sound that seemed to come from the very walls of the lighthouse itself. Ben turned to Jake, his eyes wide with excitement. "Did you hear that?" Ben asked. "I think we're finally going to see something real. The lighthouse is alive, Jake. It's haunted. I'm sure of it." Jake wasn't so sure. He shrugged, trying to dismiss his growing apprehension. "It's just the storm. Let's go back down and grab some food. Maybe we'll find something to investigate tomorrow." But as they descended the stairs, the air grew colder, and the groaning sound became more distinct. It was no longer just a creaking. Now, it was a faint whisper, like someone calling their name. The walls seemed to vibrate with the sound, and Jake felt a shiver run down his spine. Something was wrong. When they reached the bottom of the staircase, the door to the lighthouse slammed shut behind them with a force that made the entire room shake. The sudden noise startled them both, and they quickly rushed to the door, but it wouldn't open. It was as if the lighthouse itself was holding them inside. "What the hell is going on?" Jake said, panic creeping into his voice. He rattled the door, but it remained locked, as if something, or someone, was keeping them trapped inside. Ben looked around the room, his face pale. "This is it. This is the curse," Ben whispered. "We're not supposed to be here. The lighthouse isn't just haunted by the ghosts of sailors. It's holding their spirits captive." The air grew colder still, and Jake could see his breath as he spoke. "We need to get out of here. Now." They both backed away from the door, and that's when they heard it. A soft, mournful voice calling out in the darkness. It was a woman's voice, distorted by the wind and the thick walls of the lighthouse, but unmistakable. "Help me," the voice whispered. "Help me, please." Ben froze, his eyes wide with terror. "It's her. The woman who died here. Her spirit never left. She's still here, trapped inside the lighthouse." Jake's heart raced. "Who's trapped? What are you talking about?" Ben swallowed hard, stepping closer to Jake. "A woman died here. She was a sailor's wife. Her husband was lost at sea, and she waited here for him, night after night, until she too vanished. Some say her ghost still wanders the lighthouse, calling out to those who pass through." Before Jake could respond, the light above flickered. A loud bang echoed through the lighthouse as the wind slammed into the windows, rattling the glass. The air grew heavier, suffocating. They could feel a presence, a weight in the room, as if the very walls were closing in on them. Then, with a flash of lightning, the figure appeared. It was faint at first, but then it became clearer, an outline, a shadow, standing at the top of the lighthouse stairs. The woman was pale, her hair flowing around her as though caught in an unseen wind. Her eyes were wide with grief, and her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She reached out, her hands trembling. Ben stepped forward, his voice shaking. "It's her. She's asking for help." But as Ben reached toward the figure, the woman vanished. The room was silent again, save for the sound of the storm howling outside. The door, which had been locked, creaked open by itself, allowing them to escape the suffocating grip of the lighthouse. They didn't speak a word as they left the lighthouse, the wind pushing them forward, urging them to leave. The storm had passed, but the memory of the woman's ghost lingered in the air. When they returned to the mainland, neither Jake nor Ben spoke of what had happened. But they both knew one thing for sure. The lighthouse of Blackwater Island wasn't just haunted by the spirits of sailors who had lost their lives. It was haunted by something much darker, something that called out to those who dared to venture too close, waiting for them to help free the souls trapped within the walls. The Haunting of the Forgotten Boat. The small town of Milford was known for its peaceful waterfront and the old fishing village that had been around for generations. Mike had lived in the town his entire life, but he had never paid much attention to the older, abandoned parts of the village. That was until his old friend, Thomas, invited him to join him for a weekend fishing trip out on the lake. It had been years since they had gone fishing together, and Mike was eager to reconnect with his old friend and get away from the grind of everyday life. The boat was an old one, weathered and worn, but still floating. Thomas had insisted it was perfect for a weekend on the water, despite the fact that the boat looked like it had seen better days. They shoved off from the dock early one morning, the air thick with fog, and set off across the water. The lake was eerily still, the surface smooth like glass, with barely a ripple in sight. As they made their way out onto the lake, Mike couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The fog seemed to cling to the water, thick and unyielding, swallowing everything around them. The further they went, the more the town behind them seemed to fade into obscurity, and the world became a silent void, save for the creaking of the boat and the occasional plunk of the fishing line hitting the water. "It's peaceful out here," Mike said, trying to calm the unease in his chest. "Just like old times." Thomas smiled, his face bright under the dull glow of the morning sun. "Exactly. Just the way it should be." But Mike couldn't shake the sense of dread creeping over him. Something about the lake, something about the way the fog hung over the water, made it feel like they were being watched. His mind flashed back to stories he had heard as a child about the lake, how it was haunted, how the fishermen from the past had vanished without a trace. He had always dismissed it as nonsense, stories meant to scare the children. But now, as he sat in the boat with his old friend, those stories seemed less like folklore and more like warnings. The stillness of the lake was broken only by the occasional crack of thunder in the distance. The sky darkened and the wind picked up, pushing the fog even thicker across the water. Thomas, who had been in high spirits up until that point, suddenly grew quiet, his eyes scanning the fog as though looking for something. "Did you hear that?" Thomas asked, his voice low. Mike paused, listening. At first, there was nothing but the sound of the water lapping against the boat. But then, faintly, he heard it too, a soft, eerie melody drifting through the fog. It was a song, though it was unlike any song Mike had ever heard before. It was haunting, a mournful tune that seemed to come from deep within the lake itself. "That doesn't sound like any song I know," Mike said, his voice shaking slightly. "Where's it coming from?" Thomas didn't answer right. Away. Instead, he slowly turned the boat around, as if instinctively heading toward the source of the sound. "I don't know, but we should check it out." Against his better judgment, Mike nodded. His curiosity got the better of him, and they steered the boat further into the thickening fog. The melody grew louder, clearer, and Mike could almost make out the words of the song now. But they didn't sound human. They sounded like whispers, low, guttural, as though spoken by voices long forgotten. The boat glided smoothly through the water, but Mike could feel his heart racing, his palms clammy with sweat. He looked over at Thomas, who had a strange, far-off look in his eyes. It was as if he was in a trance, pulled toward the source of the eerie song. Suddenly, the boat came to a stop. They were in the center of the lake now, surrounded by the thickest fog yet. There was no sign of land, no other boats, nothing but the endless expanse of water and mist. And still, the song continued, floating through the fog like a ghostly lullaby. Thomas turned to Mike, his eyes wide and filled with an almost desperate energy. "We're close," he said, his voice trembling. "We're almost there." Mike didn't understand what Thomas meant. He felt a surge of fear, like a warning bell going off in his head. "Thomas, we need to go back. This isn't right." But Thomas didn't listen. He stood up suddenly as if possessed and walked to the edge of the boat, peering out into the fog as if he could see something in it. "It's here. I can feel it. The boat. It's right here." Mike's heart skipped a beat. What boat? But Thomas was already reaching into the water, his hand disappearing below the surface. Mike's breath caught in his throat as he watched in horror. Thomas pulled something up from the depths of the lake, an old, weathered boat, so rotted and decayed that it looked like it had been submerged for decades. It was ghostly white, with patches of moss and algae clinging to its sides, and the faintest glow seemed to emanate from within it. The eerie melody grew louder, the whispers more frantic, as if urging them to come closer. The fog around them thickened, and for a moment, Mike couldn't see anything but the strange boat and the ghostly light that surrounded it. "Get away from it!" Mike screamed, but his voice was drowned out by the wind and the song. He reached for Thomas, but it was too late. Thomas stepped into the boat, his face blank and distant. "Come with me," he murmured, his voice distant. "It's waiting for us." Mike hesitated for a moment, his instincts screaming at him to run. But as he looked at the strange boat, he saw something moving within it, something alive, something that shouldn't have been there. His stomach churned with fear, and before he could stop himself, he found himself standing in the boat, too. The moment he stepped aboard, the song stopped. The fog seemed to close. In around them, the boat sinking lower into the water, as if the lake was swallowing it whole. Mike's heart pounded in his chest, and he reached out for Thomas, but it was too late. The last thing he heard was the eerie sound of something pulling him under. The next morning, when the sun rose and the fog finally lifted, the boat was gone. The lake was still, as if nothing had happened. There was no trace of Mike or Thomas, no sign that they had ever been there. The people of Milford never spoke of the disappearance, and over time, the stories of the haunting song and the forgotten boat faded into whispers of the past. But every now and then, when the fog rolls in thick and heavy over the lake, someone will hear the faint sound of a song drifting through the mist, a mournful tune, beckoning those who are brave or foolish enough to listen.